Hello, everybody. David Shuster here. You know things are bad for Donald Trump when he has lost one of his highest profile conservative supporters. That has now happened on the issue of tariffs. Previous Trump cheerleader Joe Kernen, a host on CNBC, brought up the Trump tariffs that he has imposed on Apple devices made overseas. Kernen challenged Trump economic advisor Kevin Hassett and noted how much more expensive an iPhone would be if Apple tried to manufacture the device in the United States.
We're trying to figure out an off-ramp for Apple. It'd be a $3,000 iPhone if they tried to make everything here.
$3,500.
$3,500 for a good one, for the kind you'd like, probably, Hassett. But
no,
what's the offer?
I'm a smoke signal kind of guy.
What's the supply? Yeah, what's the supply chain issue? I mean, what is Tim Cook supposed to do?
Right. Well, we'll see how it works out.
We will see how it works out. Translation? Hassett doesn't have an answer for Apple's Tim Cook and other CEOs. Instead, Hassett only has the Trump talking points.
What we're trying to do is onshore as much as we can in the U.S. and make it so that the U.S. is not hyper-dependent on imports from China.
Right.
And so I think that one of the things we're seeing is that people are moving way faster than you might expect. If you look at the 20% equipment investment in the first quarter before the tariffs even came in, with supply chains moving fast and just-in-time inventory management and AI, I think you're going to be astonished at how quickly stuff moves onshore.
But Kevin,
and that's what we're shooting for. And in the interim, then we'll see how it works out. But they need to move their stuff onshore as much as possible to make it so that the U.S. economy is secure and not prone to Chinese extortion.
The U.S. economy needs to be secure and not prone to Chinese extortion. Well, first of all, the U.S. economy was secure before Donald Trump took office. U.S. manufacturing under Biden reached record levels, a peak. U.S. markets were great, and consumer confidence, which is what drives purchases for devices like iPhones, was high. Now, consumer confidence has dropped like a rock. And to the extent there is Chinese extortion, it's what China has threatened the United States in response to the Trump tariffs. Second, Hassett insisted that an increase in U.S. equipment investments was a sign that supply chains are already adjusting to the Trump tariffs. But in reality, Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs have caused uncertainty for the U.S. manufacturing sector and a dip in orders placed with U.S. factories for business equipment. CNBC host Andrew Ross Sorkin tried again on Kernen's point about what CEOs like Apple's Tim Cook are supposed to do.
What do you think about the prospect if Tim Cook were to come to you and say, look, we obviously can't move everything in 12 months. It's just not going to happen. Maybe we can start to move things over several years. In the meantime, we could try to assemble more of the phone in the United States. So you could actually write on the phone, assembled in the United States, or potentially, depending on what you think the merits of it are, made in the United States, maybe at their Texas facility or something else, but with a longer-term plan of maybe 5 or 10 years, frankly, of being able to actually manufacture the phones here. If he were to come to you with something like that, do you think that then there would be a reprieve for the next couple of years as they get their house in order? Because clearly it's almost, just from a physical standpoint, impossible to move everything overnight. And the damage it could do to the company overnight is obviously tremendous.
Well, it is impossible to move things overnight. But one of the things we're seeing, I was joking with a person who does bond rating in the U.S. in my office a few weeks ago. And one of the things that happens at the Director of National Economic Council office is that CEOs line up in my office. I'm kind of like the person in an airplane that's getting walloped over the head by everybody, where everybody says, we're never going to be able to do anything if we have this tariff. It's going to be a disaster if we have this tariff. And then my friend who's a bond rater said, actually, they come in and they tell me the opposite because they don't want the bonds to be downgraded. And so the point is that everybody is trying to make it seem like it's a catastrophe if there's a tiny little tariff on them right now to try to negotiate down the tariffs.
Again, Hassett did not answer the question about what Apple CEO is supposed to do. And Hassett referred to the 25% Trump tariff on Apple as a tiny little tariff. Well, that tiny little tariff caused Apple to lose 3% of its stock price in one day. That is tens of billions of dollars. Eventually, Hassett got around to addressing the question about whether it behooves Apple to try and sell a $3,500 iPhone by making it entirely in the United States. But again, Hassett only spoke in generalities.
In the end, we'll see what happens. We'll see what the end game is, but we don't want to harm Apple. And in the end, if you think that Apple has a factory someplace that's got like a set number of iPhones that it produces and it needs to sell them no matter what, then Apple will bear those tariffs, not consumers.
Apple will bear the cost of the tariffs if it needs to sell those iPhones. Well, that may be the solution for Apple over the next few months, but companies like Apple are trying to make longer-term plans. And the Trump administration is providing absolutely no guidance. Will Trump back down on the tariffs? Will he continue his on-again, off-again, on-again approach? Will Trump really keep a 25% tariff on Apple products if Apple doesn't bring all of its manufacturing to the United States? Who knows? Trump advisors keep dodging. And that makes planning for Apple, its suppliers, and related businesses nearly impossible. And this is just the chaos involving Donald Trump's tariffs. Trump's position on the GOP's tax and spending bill is also unpredictable. As it stands, the bill would add trillions of dollars to the U.S. debt. Is Donald Trump fine with that? Or should Congress pare back the bill and show more fiscal responsibility? Bond markets, which depend on America's commitment to paying back its debts, are now breaking apart. The bond markets, which are like the plumbing of the U.S. financial system, simply do not seem to trust anything coming from Donald Trump and his economic team. So bond yields are rising, and that's making borrowing costs more expensive for Americans seeking mortgages, car loans, credit cards, and so much else. There may be some rationale to an administration being vague amidst negotiations on the debt or in a trade war, but even Donald Trump's own advisors are not sure what the president's going to say or do from one day to the next. And so the markets and the economy are in trouble. Businesses like Apple are having to consider the appeal of a $3,500 iPhone. And even Donald Trump's most fervent supporters, including hosts on CNBC, are exasperated. By the way, Donald Trump's White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt is flailing as the bond markets freak out over Trump's debt bomb.
This bill saves $1.6 trillion for the American taxpayer. It saves more than any bill that has ever passed Capitol Hill has. In fact, by double. The next bill saved $800 billion. This bill saves $1.6 trillion.
While it's true the bill cuts Medicaid, student loan funding, climate change projects, and other spending, the bill costs the U.S. government even more through tax cuts for the wealthy and extra defense spending. Altogether, the bill will borrow $3.1 trillion we don't have, and the borrowing could go even higher.
So even without this tax bill, the deficit was essentially going to keep going up over the next 10 years, maybe come down a little bit at the very end, but essentially up. Then you add in the tax bill that we just talked about, including the fact that they've played the same gimmick they played in 2017, setting up some of these things to expire. And that would make the deficit impact higher, but not as high as if you made all this stuff permanent. The record of Congress, stuff almost always gets made permanent. And so somewhere along in here, they will make this permanent and will end up on this line. And this line is something like $25 trillion of additional debt.
Check out that video at the link below. I'm David Shuster. Thanks for joining us.